Alright, so picking up where we left off on the last video where we were doing a single column layout like you see here, we're going to start and do a two-column layout using a similar method. So what I want to do is just copy over our content from single, open up our double.html file, paste it in, make some quick changes. Let's get rid of this style rule. We can leave that. Save. And then bring it up. Okay, so we kind of have a blank slate again, but the same basic HTML we were dealing with in the single layout, the single column layout. So the only thing we need to add here is a sidebar. So HTML gives us an aside tag, which is a good tag for a sidebar, and we can put some content in that aside tag. So you guys can see that here. There's an additional aside. So now we have a section and an aside and a footer. So we have these four main elements if you include the header. So if we refresh that over here, save first. There we go. All right, so here's our sidebar, and it's obviously not in the right place right now. So let's fix that. Let's use a fixed width on this because I think it's a little easier to do the sidebar main content layout with a fixed width. And let's give it a width of 600 pixels. Now, this is artificially small. Actually, we can go a little bit bigger than that. Let's go 700. Okay, so this is artificially small because I'm dealing with a limited size I have to deal with on the screen here. But you know, for your site, you might want to put this up a little bit higher, maybe around 900 or 960 pixels. But 800 pixels should be fine. It should be enough room to have both a sidebar and a main content area in the same place. So we now have our two main sections that we need to get side by side. We have our section and our aside. So to do that, one other thing I want to point out here. Notice that I put the sidebar below the section of the main content. So sidebars are essentially supposed to be sidebar content, asides, non-important content but non-essential content. It's not the main content of the site. So because when screen readers and when Google and other search engines read your site, they're not reading the layout, they just see the HTML. So we want to make sure we put our main content before the sidebar because this content is more important and we want screen readers and our search engines to read and process this text first. It should be more relevant than the text in the sidebar, so logically that should go below. So moving back to the CSS, in order to make this layout look the way it should, we're going to need to apply styles to both the section element and the aside element. In fact, we may need some style on the footer as well. So first and foremost, our main section needs to, and we'll start with a right-hand sidebar here, which means our main section needs to only take up maybe 2/3 of the page. So let's go ahead and set a width on that section of, let's see, 600 pixels. Let's see what that does. I think that's going to be enough. Let's go 500. Okay, so now we have our main section content area that is set at 500 pixels. And what we want to do is we want to set our sidebar content at the remainder of the pixels, which in this case is 300. So if we save that, let's see what happens. Okay, so a few things you'll notice. First of all, the widths do stick. So the widths are where they're supposed to be, 300 and 500 respectively. But what didn't happen is the sidebar area did not get sucked up into the side of this content. And that's because remember, our main content areas are going to block off the entire section of the browser. You can see that if we look at the web inspector. So if I hover here, you can see that technically the content is still taking up that entire amount of space. You see the same thing. Let's see if I can get that to show down here. Well, it's better illustrated up here. There you go. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing down on the aside tag as well. So what we need to do is we need to float our main content or our sidebar up and out of the way. So what we can do is in our section, we can float this left and see what happens. Okay, I'm still not getting the desired results that we want. We can also float our sidebar. So let's refresh that now. Okay, so this is a double float, so both of our columns are floating now. And as you can see, they're where they should be. They're side by side, just how we want them. One thing you will notice, though, is right here, there's our footer. And it kind of looks like our footer is in the sidebar. But that's not really the case. The footer is actually below all of this content. So the reason that this is not what we call clearing, this content is not clearing this other content, is because there are two floats, and this element, the footer element, has no reference for where this content ends. So essentially this content is bleeding over into the footer. So what we need to do is we need to tell the footer to clear both of the columns. So we use the clear both rule, and there you can see the footer jumps down below the content. And just to show you a little bit better there. There you go. Okay, so one last thing we need to look at here with our content is spacing. So we can't really have a layout like this because the columns meet at essentially the same pixel. So what we need to do is we need to introduce a margin in here, a gutter for the page, if you will, so that there's a little bit better separation between these two content chunks. So I like to do that on the main section. So what I would do here is I would actually decrease this width to something like 480, and then I would add a right margin of 20 pixels. And remembering our box model from a few lessons ago, that should give us the desired outcome. And you could even go a little bit more. It might even be worth going to 475 and 25. Play around with your layout and see which looks a little bit better. So the other good thing about this clear both down here in terms of the two column layout is if our sidebar expands, so if we add another bit of content to that sidebar, our footer still remains below that. The other cool thing about this layout is you can kind of adjust it indefinitely. So you could change the ratios of size. So if that sidebar is looking a little too big, you can just adjust it down here and add a corresponding amount of pixels to the other end to kind of balance the equation, if you will, and you can move your columns around like that. So this is a double float. This is a two-column layout that's pretty typical. You'll see a lot in blogs and a lot of standard laid-out websites. And this is a good foundation for building more complex layouts and adding more design on top of this. So this is our two-column layout.